Welcome to another edition of the NCBI Podcast. I'm June Tinsley, Head of Communications and Advocacy with NCBI. And today on my show, I have the pleasure of having a chat with Deirdre Leech, who works with the Anne Sullivan Centre, who's here to talk to me all about the services they offer to people who are deafblind. So welcome, Deirdre, and thanks for taking the time to have a chat with me.
Thanks, June. Thanks for having me on and highlighting deafblindness. I'm delighted to be here.
Great. So I suppose just for the benefit of our listeners, if you can kind of tell us a little bit about the Anne Sullivan Centre and its origins and all that kind of stuff.
Sure. So there's actually two parts. So there's the Anne Sullivan Centre, which is located in Stillorgan on the south side of Dublin. And there are day and residential services there for adults who are deafblind. And that originated in, I think, 1986. Is when that was set up. And the foundation, the Anne Sullivan Foundation that I work for, is the charity associated, and that started in 1989. And again, a group of parents of school leavers who were deafblind were looking for somewhere for their son or their daughter to continue their education and have kind of a home for life. So they purchased a few houses around the center there in Stillorgan, and that's where the residential services are. But then in 2010, they set up the outreach services that I work for, and we provide support for people of any age all over the country who have combined vision and hearing loss.
Sounds fascinating. And in terms of the numbers of individuals, obviously work with the sight loss community. Some of our service users are overlapping with yourself, but ballpark, we know that there is around 55,000 people who are blind or vision impaired in Ireland. And that's probably an underestimate because it's a figure from a couple of years ago. But I'm just curious of the proportion who are deaf-blind. Do we have any indication of what numbers you're talking about?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Unfortunately, unlike vision and hearing, we don't have a very accurate number in that there isn't a registry. So we gather our information from the CSO. So the last, we're waiting on the information from the last census from 2022, but from the previous ones in 2011, 2016, what we do is we gather who has ticked the box that they have, they're either blind or visually impaired, as well as ticking the box that they are deaf or hearing impaired. So from those numbers, those say about 1,700, but then if you add in one additional disability, those numbers go up to about 10 and 13,000, give or take. So we only currently know about 200 people. So very clearly there are more people out there that we don't know about. But just getting that accurate number is really challenging for us because there isn't a registry. And we just rely on, again, people like yourselves who, work with one sense or the other until they find that overlap. And then they may, refer on to us.
Yeah, true. I mean, I suppose we're all waiting for the Census 22 figures to be released to kind of give us an updated picture, but even the census itself, it's self-identified, so individuals might not have ticked those boxes for whatever reason. So as you say, there's no register from like a GP or the health research board or any of those kind of databases that could kind of distill exactly the accurate number of diagnoses of individuals with a sight loss condition or those with who are have dual sensory issues.
Absolutely. And we rely a lot on those other services. So whether it's hospitals with new babies, disability services, visiting teacher service, there's a lot of different places, even, parents or family members themselves may refer on to us, but we are very reliant on those other services. And we do realize that there are a lot of people out there living in Ireland who may not identify as deafblind per se. That they may have, we say dual sensory loss, or sometimes we say combined vision and hearing loss. And really whatever that person chooses, to use, we would go with that. So we're not into labeling people or anything like that, but the same sort of support and services available for anyone who has that, any degree really of losses in either sense.
And I guess you obviously work with children as well as adults from an outreach perspective. And what do you think are the kind of unique challenges that face the community, and what would the solutions be?
Yeah, I think one of the main things that makes, I suppose, my job so interesting is that every person we meet is so different. So whether it's the level of hearing or vision they have, what other additional needs they have, there's quite a range of abilities, we'll say. So everyone we meet, really, we have to assess and kind of see what their abilities are, what their strengths are, what's their primary sense, and the communication piece, I suppose, is the main thing. But some of the challenges, I suppose, they face if they're congenitally deafblind, so from birth or up to about age 2, is that sort of lack of overseeing, overhearing, that incidental learning piece, that if you had a loss in one sense, you have the other sense to compensate for that sense. But if you have a loss in both, you can really miss out on a lot of information. And that means concepts and, things that we just pick up in the environment that we don't even realize that we're learning. We're not actively trying to learn. We just gather information from our parents, from our siblings, from, people that come through our lives. But for children who are congenitally deafblind, they may not have that benefit. So we have to find ways. And that's what I do, is I kind of work with the teachers and the SNAs and the families, and sort of creating ways for them to learn these skills in the manner that they learn, which is, it could be objects, pictures, lots of different methods.
Yeah, and I suppose obviously from the perspective of the children and young people that we would work with, as I said, there's obviously overlap with some of the service users with both organisations, but certainly working with parents, a lot of it is down to try and educate them how to play and interact with their infants or young children who have a sensory loss, so that, as you rightly say, the children can develop alternative strategies to develop in their own way. Certainly, as we know, children under the age of 5 just are sponges and learn and develop purely from the environment around them, and whether it's picking up on conversations or it's seeing the world around them. And if they don't have those senses, then they have to learn alternative strategies.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the guts of what we do, is really looking at how that person learns and how we can, maximize their learning, and how we can learn, teach them whatever concept that is. As most of the people we support may be the only person in their particular service or school or, in their town, or, whatever it is, who is deafblind. So those strategies wouldn't be, common, and they wouldn't be strategies that would be typically learned in, teacher training, or we meet a lot of speech and language therapists who come to our trainings because it's communication is what they're working on with the child, but they may not have another child in their, on their caseload who has this combination of conditions.
Yeah, and I suppose, as you rightly say, pupils will be attending mainstream school, and often the teacher isn't equipped enough to know how to ensure that child is an active participant in the class, just like everybody else.
Absolutely.
So while the visiting teacher does play a significant role, there isn't enough of them to go around to meet demand. So there is an onus on the teacher to try and upskill themselves, really, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another kind of phrase or thing we say is, it's not like taking the strategies you use for people who are blind and visually impaired, and the strategies that you use with someone who's deaf or hard of hearing, and putting those together. It's a complete unique set of strategies. And so we refer to it as, it's a multiplicative. So it's not just 1 and 1 equals 2. It really does mean a lot more. So a lot of those strategies, and they're nothing too outrageous. They're kind of just really looking at, again, what the person's needs are and how we can best meet them through communication. Can be really, easily taught to anyone who's interested.
Yeah, and I suppose from an adult's perspective, I'm guessing is a sense of isolation quite common amongst individuals who are deafblind?
It can be. It can be. Yeah, we do. We have a number of adults that access our service, and they could be adults who are congenitally deafblind, like many of our residents in our center. But then we also work with a lot of people who have acquired deafblindness. So that could be due to Usher syndrome. It could be due to medical issues, brain tumors, or it could be just older age. So as we know, many of our family members, neighbors, friends, grandparents can, have a gradual loss of hearing and vision over time. And that can cause a lot of, difficulty, again, like you said, through social. They might feel more isolated. They may be living on their own. They may not, drive anymore, so they might not have access to their community. So there's lots of different ways they can, they could become more isolated over the years. So that is something that we definitely we would be dealing with. Yeah.
And I suppose for those individuals who are blind or vision impaired, certainly technology has been a huge enabler, particularly with the advances in screen readers and magnification and all those kind of aids and cues that assist people to do daily tasks at a far easier pace than previously. But obviously for individuals who are deaf-blind, the audio features in your smartphone are not going to be suitable. So have you found if technology has assisted in the quality of life for individuals who are deaf-blind?
Yeah, I suppose for the majority of the people we support, they may have some residual hearing or vision, so they may, tap into that. But I do find there are a lot of mainstream technologies now, which people do have access to. Again, it depends on if they have hearing aids or cochlear implants and have access to that sound. Bluetooth is everywhere now, between connecting straight into their hearing aids or their cochlear implant into their phone, into, different devices, Google Homes and Echoes and Alexas and all of these things. They can give someone a lot of access. And again, if they have limited vision and some hearing, then, it can really make a big difference in their lives if they can, access those devices. So we found it really just depends. There aren't really deafblind specific technologies, but there are a lot of things, and we do a lot of training and showing people, different modifications or different adaptations or features, be it on their phone or, a communication device. There's so much, and it changes every day. There's new, as there's new technology all the time. Yeah.
Exactly. And I suppose another question I have is in connection with the sign language that is used, and obviously it's done very tactile on the individual's hand. And the way in different countries there's different sign language. So is there a different sign language done tactilely in different countries?
So we typically, we could have deafblind adults or children that we work with who are Irish Sign Language users. There's also LOV, which is kind of a more simplified. It's not a language, but it's more of a sign system that has a vocabulary of so many hundred, words that people might use in addition to speech or in addition to pictures. But for people who use Irish Sign Language, it's really just tactile sign language is just really the receiver's hand over the hand producing the Irish Sign Language. So for the person who is deafblind, they would hold their hands over, and you can just use ISL in its typical form. May need to be modified if there's two-handed signs, and maybe they might have one hand maybe on their cane or something, and they may only have one hand available. So sometimes you need to modify, but no, it's your typical sign language. And then what we found here is we may have people who access our service who know British Sign Language as well, because we're either close to the border, or maybe they've gone and gotten some education maybe in London and come back, or different things. We've had a lot of people who have come back and forth, so they may know both British Sign Language and Irish Sign Language. So some of the interpreters that we use may know both. So it's handy in a way. But and then we've had people come to different conferences and different things we've done who may know American Sign Language, but a lot of people there's some overlap. So people who are deaf really do find the way, and they'll find a way to communicate with the person, even if they have a different sign language from another country. Yeah, it's really interesting.
It's fascinating, actually, the variety that's there.
Yeah.
And I suppose just in terms of how people can access your service, if you can explain that, and how people can become residents of the centre in Stillorgan as well. How does that happen?
Sure. So I suppose at the moment we're at capacity. We have 13 residents and we have 2 day service users. We're hoping to expand the day service a bit more. And then referrals to our outreach service, anything to go on our website. There are links there. So it's just www.annesullivan.ie, and that's Anne with an E at the end. So if you can't think of it, it's Helen Keller's teacher. The center is named after because her family originated in Limerick and they immigrated to the States. And so we were paying homage to Anne Sullivan. So it's Anne with an E. And yeah, I suppose you can, there's is an email, info@annesullivan.ie would be an email if you just have a query or a question. There's also, I believe, a form on our website. So there's lots of different ways. There's only 2 of us who provide the outreach. The east, so she would cover Dublin and areas around Dublin. So we could direct you, or we're quite happy if people don't necessarily want another person on the team, because for a lot of the children and maybe more complex adults we provide services for, they may have a lot of different professionals on the team. So we're quite happy to just link in with those professionals and lead them in a direction or provide resources. We do some online training as well. That's been really popular. That's free to anyone who would like to. So there's information on that, or you can just email the info@annesullivan.ie, and we'll get back to you and we'll direct your question.
Brilliant. And I suppose the last question then, Deirdre, is I suppose through your work, what one piece of advice would you give to someone who's deafblind?
Ooh, that's a tough one, because they're like I said, it's such a diverse population. So advice for the person who's deafblind or the person working with them?
the person themselves.
Yeah,
subjective, but anyway.
Yeah, I know. I think sometimes I think people don't want to ask for help and they feel vulnerable, but I think just there are people out there who are quite happy and patient to communicate with them. So don't hesitate to just let people know, this is how I communicate, this is what I would like, and really tell people your preferences, because I think that's a real nice direct way. Whereas I think sometimes people don't feel like they want to be intrusive or direct and tell people. But I think that's what people want. I think people want to know, this is how I communicate, this is what I prefer, this is the way to do it. And so just, to be direct and indicate your preferences when dealing, because they're always dealing with, new people and strangers, and, it's hard to have to explain yourself all the time, but people do want, I think, to communicate with you, but there is an anxiety piece from the stranger's perspective on, not knowing how to communicate, and people will just, they won't communicate if they don't know what to do. So I think just be upfront and tell people exactly how you communicate and what you want.
A sound piece of advice, in fairness, because it's in their interests, really, if they do feel confident enough to declare the way they would like to be communicated with.
Yeah.
Perfect. So listen, Deirdre, I'd just like to say thank you very much for taking the time to have a chat with me. If anyone is interested in learning more about the Anne Sullivan Centre and Foundation, jump on to annesullivan.ie, and with an E. And for anyone wanting to access NCBI services, feel free to contact the info line 1-800-911-250, or jump onto our website ncbi.ie. And as always, all editions of the podcast is available on our website, on all podcasting platforms, and on YouTube. So feel free to subscribe. But for now, thank you very much, Deirdre, and thanks for the chat.
Thanks, June. Thanks, everyone.